The tipping point in Anbar. How little things can make a big difference in crossing the chasm. My name is Luke Larson, and this is a brief Mauro Mojica and myself, both former Marine infantry officers, gave at the Stanford Business Club of San Diego, using entrepreneurial business concepts to analyze the Anbar awakening. In 2005, our battalion was deployed to Ramadi, Iraq, the provincial capital of Anbar province. The city averaged over 30 attacks a day. The situation was so bleak that one Marine intelligence lieutenant colonel wrote off the city as being lost. Being on the ground at the time, I wouldn't say the situation was unwinnable, although it certainly did not feel like we were making progress. In 2007, we deployed back to the same city. On our second deployment, there were 0 attacks, and we lived in the city in harmony with the Iraqi people. How did it happen? Was it the surge, additional troops deployed to Iraq, or was it the awakening, local militias joining up as Iraqi police? I would argue that the two complemented each other to achieve a tipping point in the Anbar province. What is an epidemic? Drastic change in incident rate. In the span of just over a month, we saw something in Anbar in the spring of 2007. 38 days with 0 attacks. Daily attacks decreased from over 30 a day to 0. In Anbar, we saw a reverse epidemic. In the book The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, he uses 3 concepts to explain an epidemic: the law of the few, the stickiness, and the power of context. With the law of the few, Gladwell explains that a tiny percentage of people are responsible for change. The example that Gladwell uses is Paul Revere. He calls him a connector. When Paul Revere made his midnight ride saying the British are coming, it mattered because he wasn't just some guy. He was a successful businessman, a Mason, and a colonial patriot. He was a man with a social network, not a Facebook network, but a real social network of over 150 people. He was well known by everyone in the greater Boston area. So when he rode his horse throughout the night spreading the message, the British are coming, it mattered because he was Paul Revere and the people listened. In Iraq, the Paul Revere of the awakening was Sheikh Sitar Abu Risha. Sheikh Sitar was an oil smuggler and the son of the Abu Risha clan, a subset of the Dulaim tribe and the largest and most important tribe in Iraq. He was well known and had legitimacy throughout Anbar. His father and brothers were beheaded by Al-Qaeda. He gave an equivalent message of the British are coming. His message was it's time to partner with the Americans, and the Iraqi people listened. The stickiness is a term Gladwell describes in The Tipping Point as a memorable message that makes an impact and sticks. Following the invasion into Iraq in 2003 through 2006, Al-Qaeda had a particularly sticky message they spread through their murder and intimidation campaign. If you don't X, we will Y. If you don't do as we say, we'll cut your head off. If you don't turn a blind eye, we'll dump acid on your child's face. If you don't X, you get the picture. The key was Al-Qaeda had a very sticky message that resonated with the Iraqi populace. In late January 2007, General Petraeus took over as multinational forces commander. He had a drastic change in his message to the troops and the Iraqis. Petraeus said the security of the population and the partnership with Iraqi security forces would be the focus of the military effort. Petraeus' message was simple and sticky: the people are the prize. In order for a message to stick, the context must be right. Be there. Article number 10 from David Kikolin's 28 articles. You can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to be there. In 2007, we continued the initiative from 1st Battalion 6 Marines and pushed off of our big bases and moved into the city. My company commander, Captain Marcus Mines, now a EWS instructor, broke his rifle company into 10-man combined armed action teams and sent them to live in the Ville. Kikolin sums this up by saying in a counterinsurgency you have to be there. This demands a residential approach, living in your sector with the population. These techniques establish links with the locals who then see you as real people who they can trust and do business with, not aliens who descend from ivory towers and white castles. Action makes a message sticky. Gladwell's third concept is the power of context. During the early part of the insurgency following the 2003 invasion of Iraq, Al-Qaeda's fighters were invited into Iraq by the tribes to fight against the Americans. Al-Qaeda, in an attempt to tighten their grip, became increasingly repressive and challenged the tribal leaders' power. Soon they were kidnapping and beheading Sunnis as part of a campaign of murder and terror. The 2006 bombing of the Shia Samarra Mosque, which many considered sacred by both Sunnis and Shias, was an indicator of how bad the situation had become. In 2007, in an Iraqi motif over chai and Dunhill cigarettes, an Iraqi police chief told me the following story. He said Al-Qaeda did something that ruined them. He told me they put an IED in front of a man named Niall's house in 2005. Niall was a bread maker, a menial low-status job for an Arab. Niall is the third son of the third wife of his father and is a peasant. The chief told me he holds no real wasta, social capital, in the tribe. When a Marine convoy drove by, Al-Qaeda blew up the IED in front of the bread maker's house. The IED killed several Marines, which was no real loss, but it also killed Niall's oldest son, a 9-year-old, who played in the street that day. The chief told me, to us death is a part of life, and Niall viewed his son's death as Insha'Allah, the will of Allah. The bread maker thought his son's death was part of Allah's divine plan to rid the Holy Land of infidels. But shortly after, Al-Qaeda put another IED in front of Niall's house. Niall had a second son, a 7-year-old, and he feared he would lose his second son to this IED as well. He could not justify that Allah would want him to lose 2 sons. So Niall went to Al-Qaeda and asked him to move the IED. The Al-Qaeda members laughed at Niall and told him he was trivial, and the Mujahideen holy warriors were blessed by the will of Allah to do what was necessary to fight the infidels. As the chief told the story, he held up a small grain of sand in the desert and pinched it between his fingertips, gesturing the bread maker's work to Al-Qaeda. Niall told the insurgents he accepted the killing of Marines, but he forbade them to put another IED in front of his house. The bread maker had decided it was worth his own life to save the second son. Al-Qaeda told Niall to leave. They threw him in the street and shut the door. After banging on the door for hours, Niall finally went home defeated. The next day, he opened his front door looking for his second son, and on Niall's doorstep was the bloody head of his 7-year-old son. The Irhab bean had cut the child's head off and threw it on Niall's doorstep, still dripping blood. The bread maker then went to Sheikh Sitar's father, the chief said, and he begged the elder sheikh for justice. The elder sheikh felt shame that he had invited Al-Qaeda into his bed. The sheikh's father, after hearing the story, went to Al-Qaeda and told them to stop the violence, or he intended to rise against them and push them out of the country. They killed the old man and disgraced his body. The act was one of the reasons that Sheikh Sitar started the awakening. This is the power of context. Looking at the awakening through the framework of the tipping point, we see Sheikh Sitar as the law of the few, a man with a sticky message. It's time to partner with the Americans. And the context was the situation had gotten so bad through Al-Qaeda's murder and intimidation campaign that the Iraqi people were ready to receive it. In Geoffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, he argues that consumers who purchase new technologies fall into 5 categories. An example would be with the iPod. My older brother, an engineer who is an innovator, he is excited about the technology and buys it. My brother tells his friends, other engineers, who buy the first iPods, these are early adopters. But in order for Apple to make money with the iPod, they can't just sell to the small market of innovators and early adopters who enjoy technology and performance. They need to get across the chasm to the bigger market, which my wife and I would fall into. We're pragmatists who just want a convenient solution. For Apple's iPod, we're the majority. If they can sell to us, they'll make millions. My mom, a late majority consumer, would follow, and then 5 years from now, my dad, a laggard and a skeptic, will eventually give up his 8-track and sooner or later buy an iPod. The framework of crossing the chasm can be applied to more than just technology consumers, and today we'll apply it to the Anbar awakening. The U.S. forces crossed the chasm in Anbar by making a drastic shift from conventional warfare to counterinsurgency warfare. In conventional warfare, the focus is on the enemy. From day one of boot camp or the basic school, privates and lieutenants are taught to focus on the enemy. In a counterinsurgency, the focus is different. The military forces are still interested in defeating the enemy, but they must do this by achieving the support of the people. In this case, they are treating the Iraqi people as a market, and they are trying to win their support. From the beginning of the Iraq War, al-Qaeda simply did a better job than the U.S. at achieving the support of the Iraqi people. After years of war, the U.S. forces needed a different strategy to achieve the people's support. The new strategy was a counterinsurgency approach that focused on more than just security and combat operations. To move the populace from supporting the insurgency to supporting the government, the U.S. would have to focus on 5 logical lines of operations: combat ops, training of local security forces, essential services, governance, and economic development. Looking through the framework of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you see there are several tiers of human motivation. In the maneuver warfare concept of surfaces and gaps, we see in a conventional war that the surfaces and gaps are largely focused on combat operations at the security tier. In a counterinsurgency, the complexity increases, and the surfaces and gaps can now be found on all tiers. If the insurgents exploit these gaps on any tier, they can affect the will of the populace. Putting this all together, looking at the Iraqi people as a market, we have innovators and early adopters who are Iraqis willing to stand up to al-Qaeda and fight for change. Sheikh Sattar was an innovator, a visionary who spread the message it's time to partner with the Americans. He recruited the early adopters who were his tribesmen who became Iraqi police. By arming the militias, this brought about short-term security, but in order to truly win the support of the Iraqi people and achieve a tipping point, we needed to focus on more than just security. With the Petraeus' message of the people are the prize and utilizing the 5 Lus, the Iraqi people saw the U.S. was generally interested in their needs. It is important to note that the majority are pragmatists. They need to see real change on all levels: basic needs, security, essential services, and economic development. Once we have achieved the support of the people, can we fall back into the chasm? Absolutely. In this fluid environment, the insurgents are still fighting to get the support of the people through intimidation or other means. My first company commander and then my battalion executive officer, Major Rory Quinn, used to say that 5 Iraqis would sit around and plan how to kill the lieutenant in the Ville. He was the face of the U.S., and the Iraqis knew that he was the one making graphs and influencing where the money went. On the first day, the first Iraqi would say, "Let's kill Lieutenant Larson." The second Iraqi would say, "Not today. He's fixing the electricity in my neighborhood, and I've never had power." The Iraqis agree they'll wait 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, they meet, and the second Iraqi says, "The power's up and running now. Let's kill Lieutenant Larson." The third Iraqi says, "No, we can't kill him yet. He's building a school in my area, and I desperately want my son to go to school. He's never been before. Let's kill him in 3 weeks after the school is built." And on and on and on the story goes. The point is that people need to see their lives are being made better, or they'll slip back into the chasm and their support will be an easy grab for the insurgents. The power of context. In The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell discusses New York City's implementation of the broken windows theory. In Ramadi, we also used the broken windows theory. The pictures on the left show images from 2005 where the city was in ruins. You see sewage running in the street, IED craters, and bolt holes in the walls. The same streets in 2007 show no sewage, nicely painted streets, and even Iraqi flags hanging in the street. Can you fall back into the chasm? In counterinsurgency, the surfaces and gaps are the needs of the populace. In order not to fall back into the chasm, you must show improvement. Are these lessons applicable to Afghanistan? My identical twin brother, Marine Captain Levi Larson, is currently deployed to the Helmand province trying to answer that question. Our ultimate success will depend upon our own country's commitment to the region. The key that must underlie successful epidemics is a bedrock belief that change is possible. Although there are drastic differences between Iraq and Afghanistan, with the law of the few, the right message, and the power of context, I'm confident the U.S. can find the Sheikh Sittars and bread makers of Afghanistan.